Okay, everyone, we're going to start now, and if you are with the audio, that's great. My name is Richard Harris. I'm working with NorCal SAF, Society of American Foresters, and organizing and conducting this webinar series. The webinar series on California forest and greenhouse action, and there's going to be three. This session today will cover reforestation and fuels treatments. The session next week will cover oak woodland projects and conservation easements. On the 17th, we'll have a question and answer session for people who are preparing applications for the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund grant program. And so there we have it.
Richard, if you're going to get started on it, you need to go ahead and start the record.
I did.
Okay.
Okay, here we go. Okay, so this program was initiated at the request of Cal Fire, who's administering the greenhouse gas reduction grant program for forestry projects. The webinar is sponsored by NorCal SAF, UC Cooperative Extension, who is hosting the service at UC Davis and in Cal Fire. This series is supported in part by a grant from Forest Service, State and Private Forestry to NorCal SAF. So the project types that we're looking at here through the grant program are reforestation. We'll be covering that today. Demonstration state forest research will not be covered in this web series. California Forest Legacy, avoided conversions, and improved management projects will be covered on April 10th. And we realize that those applications are submitted for this grant cycle, but there will be another grant, so that's why we're offering that coverage. Fuels reduction covered today. Pest control, we'll actually try that somewhat today, and then we'll be covering it further on the 10th. On the 17th, as I mentioned, we're going to have a Q&A session. Program timberland environmental impact reports will not be covered in this webinar series. So the focus of today's presentation is on conifer forests and with examples from mixed conifer. As I mentioned, next week there's a number of applications that are potentially going to be submitted that deal with oak woodlands, and so we're going to cover all next week. And Tom Scott from UC Riverside will be covering that. So some of the issues with each project, reforestation, some of the things we need to consider. Let me give you a little overview here. Existing carbon loading in the project area. How will the carbon be affected? Will site prep involve disturbance? We have to deal with equipment emissions, site productivity, and the method to project the future forest. And then important to try to estimates, if you can, with corroborative evidence. Forest legacy projects are actually projects that involve funding for conservation easements to avoid conversion or for improved forest management. One of the big items with that is documenting the current carbon stocks from an inventory. You need to estimate future growth over a 10-year period, model the reduction in carbon stocks from any harvesting or conversion, estimate storage in wood products and landfills. And for these projects particularly, you need to have a working knowledge of the Inter-Resource Board forest protocols. Mike, if you're still on, it sounds like the music is still playing. Fuels reduction projects, we need to document the existing stand conditions. Again, there's a data acquisition issue there. Model proposed removals, either with the use of a simulator, forest vegetation, 4C, both of which have carbon extensions. Have to estimate the disposition of removed materials, biomass or merchantable timber. The greenhouse gas reductions relate to avoided emissions, and these can be estimated with FES or other methods, which will be described today. And then you have shadow effects or potential shadow effects on adjacent lands, which means the effects of the treatment on reducing fire severity or occurrence even on adjacent lands. Pest control projects, in many ways, the documentation requirements for greenhouse gas reductions are similar to avoided emissions and fuel treatments. Standard data is important, and removals and growth can be modeled if you have those data. Alternatively, there's the use of the carbon online estimator, and I'll be describing that today in relationship to reforestation. Carbon losses are estimated based on risk, and consideration has to be given to biomass and merchantable timber. So the some issues that need to be addressed in these analyses are the existence of inventory information, either from on-site surveys or other sources. Familiarity with growth models is a definite plus, and then consideration of wood products, biomass, and avoided emissions, which requires knowledge of the ARB protocols and other information. So with that, if you have a couple questions, you can put them into the chat box. Otherwise, I'm going to turn it over to Helge Yang. So if you have a question or two, please do it now. Just enter it into the chat box.